Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, September 27th, 2023. Time for another show. Time for another announcement of the date. Time for another realization that I don't actually have any other better opening line than that. And it's like 15 years into the show. So maybe I'll start giving that some thought. But many other things that deserve thought and require thought that we have to get to before we get to that stuff. A brief reminder, you will have seen in the news by now, and we'll discuss it, of course, that all is, shaking out as expected in the courtrooms for the former guy. But, at any rate, I don't know what to tell you. Oh, look at this. I was getting conflicting messages from Justice about whether or not we were on the air, but it looks like everything is okay now. All right, yes, great, fantastic, wonderful. Now we'll tell you what the news is. I wonder what the issue was. There's all sorts of music playing in my headphones. I was having a great time. So I'm glad the rest of you are able to join us too. Trump getting some bad news in the courtroom as usual. And, guess what? It's in the civil cases that we have forgotten about, perhaps. And anyway, he's being handed the same bad news he's always being handed. You don't know what you're talking about. The things you've done are illegal. Your theories of the law are as if children made them up. I might have to sanction your lawyers. You just seem to want to stand there and say like, we the people, Your Honor, and I'm a people, so therefore I don't, Anyway. It's good news for the rest of us, and a fantastic ruling. It's not the end of the case there. I think it's just a preliminary ruling. We'll catch up on all of what happened here. But the upshot of it is that there are headlines around the country this morning about, once again, Trump being found out to have been a fraud the whole time. This is in the New York Attorney General's case against his business practices at the Trump Organization, and as others have pointed out, and maybe we'll read more lengthy commentary by the end of the show at some point today, but I think I saw Steve Bannon tweeting today. This really sort of sums it up. I wonder, can I call this thing up anywhere? It might have, I don't remember which of the various social media it's on. Now I don't have to remember because it's here. Steve Bannon on Blue Sky this morning, and you can all contact us, our KITM network. If anybody needs to move over to Blue Sky or wants to give it a try and needs an invite, I think we found a couple of people who had some to spare, so let us know. At any rate, Steve Bannon saying it takes a special kind of person to get caught overseeing a fraudulent charity, a fraudulent university, and he encloses that in scare quotes, and a business that repeatedly committed fraud. What kind of special person is that? A fraud. And, they are special people. We can give them that. Yes, so some in-depth coverage, I'm sure, yet to come, because everybody's covering it, and all the major newspapers have it. Greg will probably want to talk about it. Maybe some other things as well. But I'm glad to say that's making the headlines, and people are taking it seriously. Maybe not Trump. He sort of thinks he can wiggle out of everything still until they finally close the prison door behind him. He's going to, that's just the kind of person he is. He thinks he's going to get away with things. That may or may not be the kind of person that Bob Menendez is. I mean, they're both similarly in trouble with the law, I guess. Different reasons, but not that dissimilar. But I was wondering yesterday, just sort of thinking about him, whether he's also the sort of person that just thinks, you're just never going to get me on this stuff. And he's not wrong to think so. Of course, he's been indicted and tried before, and it ended in a hung jury, and he walked away, and the charges got dismissed. And in the meantime, I guess, was it in the meantime, or maybe it was immediately after, he's not entirely wrong about these things, because I just was thinking back to Bob McDonnell's case, former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, who similarly was gifted all sorts of things in exchange for official acts and claimed that he was being given personal gifts by good, close personal friends, and they actually did let him get away with it. And yeah, sure, we see exactly what you're talking about, and he walked away from that. And I don't know, just between Trump thus far not being locked up, Bob McDonnell getting a pass, and a couple of other cases, including his own first trial ending in nothing in particular happening to him, you got to wonder whether he is hanging on in the face of all these calls for resignation, and the belief that he could walk away once again, although this one seems a little more difficult. The gold bars really doesn't help anything. I'll say that much. Okay. Plenty more to round up, of course. See if I can give you some sort of preview as to where we're going. I don't know. Oh, yeah, right. I forgot to mention, I don't think it's going to end up being a big deal because they're just going to, I don't know. I don't know exactly how this one lands. But Donald Trump and guns. I think, you've probably seen this story. But I guess he stopped by somewhere on a visit to South Carolina, stopped by one or another of the famous gun operations that keeps selling weapons to mass murderers, essentially, is what's happening here. And decided well, he was shown, I think, a pistol, a Glock pistol that had been engraved with his likeness. A great round orange pumpkin on the gun, on the pommel, on the grip. And I guess it's not really a pommel. But anyway, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Magazine clip. You tell me. Anyhow, he expressed some interest apparently in purchasing this gun, and now it's a question mark as to whether he actually did or not. And you can believe that. With Trump, he says he bought something. There's a whole trial going on in New York where it was just ruled that you can't believe him when he says he owns things or how much they're worth. But at any rate, he expressed some interest in buying this gun, and apparently, well, as it turns out, that's against the law because he's under indictment, and there are actual, state, I don't know if there was a federal statute, we'll see what it gets pointed to here, but some serious implications for a person under criminal indictment to purchase a gun. And naturally, they didn't check out whether that was a factor in all this. And so they had to backpedal. Well, he didn't actually buy the gun. He's just on video promising that he will and talking about, I guess, how rich he is and how he can buy anything he wants, except he can't buy that thing in front of everybody and not land in more trouble. So I guess they decided to lie about what they did there in the hopes that no one else will find out. Well, Greg Dworkin is here in the hopes that everyone will find out that he's here. I don't really have to say anything at this point, but I will by way of segue into the next segment. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good morning.
Yeah,
so
there we go. Now we're in the next segment.
There's a lot to talk about, and we can give you a quick list, but to follow up on something you were just talking about. Steve Gutowski, who is a gun rights person, editor of The Reload, and somebody I often cite and have cited on this show over the years. Yeah. And he's a gun safety advocate. He's a teacher of how to shoot properly. He is what we used to call a straight shooter in the traditional sense. That is to say, he's pretty honest. He'll engage with any liberal and say, here are the list of terms you should be using because it helps your case and makes you more credible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. And he was the first one to point out that, wait a minute, I just saw a video of Trump buying a gun. That's impossible. It's illegal for him to do that. Impossible. It's a federal law.
Federal, good.
Indictment. You can't do that.
Awesome. It comes at a good time for, say, Hunter Biden, who likewise is under indictment for breaking federal law with respect to gun ownership and a different kind of criminality. But yeah, hey, well, good for him. Who are we talking about? It was Steve
Gutowski.
Gutowski, not Steve Gutenberg of Police Academy and Cocoon fame.
Right.
Okay.
So, he originally posted, Trump is under multiple federal felony indictments, so he can't receive, quote unquote, new guns. But then he goes into the ambiguity of it because it's always ambiguous. As you pointed out, first of all, Trump lies, so we don't even know that he bought the gun. Secondly, we don't know that he received it. It could have been for publicity. I'm sending you the tweet thread.
Okay.
A federal judge struck down the prohibition against people under indictment as applied to a man in Texas last year, so there are constitutional questions surrounding it.
Yeah, but he's not
The case
in
was
Texas.
appealed and is awaiting a ruling from a Fifth Circuit panel.
Oh.
So there hasn't been any action since June, but the Fifth Circuit's been extremely skeptical of many federal firearms restrictions since SCOTUS handed this down, which, by the way, does apply to Hunter Biden absolutely, as you pointed out. And Gutowski says, I've been looking into the legal side of this situation. There are a couple of more rulings on 18 U.S.C., funny-looking squiggle 922.
Oh, yeah, right.
There are several
Silk
other
Crow.
post-Brun that uphold it as constitutional. U.S. versus Bartucci upholds it after doing an analysis, too. So as with a number of federal gun laws, different district judges have come down on different sides of the question. The Fifth Circuit seems likely to be the first appeals court to weigh in, but we're still waiting.
Okay. I mean, not a good sign when the Fifth Circuit takes it. But still.
Then there's a state piece, too.
Oh, well, okay.
It may be, according to some South Carolina residents, that a non-resident can't purchase a handgun in South Carolina.
Hey, that seems fair. And, you want to, of course, conservatives are all about prohibiting people from traveling across state lines to do in different states what they're not permitted to do in their own. So, they're definitely going to track him down and track his phone, etc., making it difficult for him to get away with this.
As you pointed out, the whole thing is just stupid.
Well, yeah.
And, part of the stupid is that,
there's a lot of that.
As Steve Bannon pointed out, as you pointed out, and as I would put it, as of this moment, Trump is a proven in a court of law fraud and a proven in a court of law sex offender. And it's perfectly appropriate, therefore, to include that in all stories that you write about him, as well as political ads.
And maybe now he's a gun runner as well.
Yeah. So,
cool.
that remains to be seen. But clearly he's a proven fraud, so you can't believe anything he says.
Yes. I also did want to say, I saw a still photo from the photo op of him in the gun shop. Well, one, I will point out that the gun dealer has a bit of a fashy haircut. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah. This is a Glock. Oh,
yes.
Glock's a good gun, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. And I also wanted to say kudos to the Secret Service for allowing a photo op in which a guy approaches Trump with a pistol and points it at him in the picture. I really liked that. No, he didn't have his finger on the trigger. I'm sure the gun wasn't loaded. I imagine that they made all sorts of weird clearances, etc. But yeah, all right. As you say, accidents never happen. And yeah, there you go. It's not your grandfather's Secret Service. Now you can pose with an ex-president with a gun pointed into his belly. And I'm just saying that if anybody else wanted to take pictures like that, you're clear to do it, apparently. And just ask for a selfie anytime.
So the way the New York Times handles it, I think, is good. This is about that yesterday's fraud ruling. Ruling against Trump cuts to the heart of his identity.
It should cut to his heart for sure. I mean, I advocate that as well.
I don't know if I'm looking and I see a Trump Make America Great Again sign behind him. I don't see the picture of the gun owner of the shop pointing a gun at Trump's heart. I don't see that, but it would have been a very good.
The way to his heart is through his stomach, as you know, and that's what he was pointing at.
The way to his heart is through a gun shop in South Carolina because he loves Glocks.
Right.
And nobody's, suggesting violence. This is not.
He just loves Glock.
Yeah. This is not, showing a picture of a judge with a cross target on it.
He posed for this picture. I don't know why the guy pointed a gun at him. He did.
Right.
And he thought it was awesome.
So, the finding by a judge in a New York civil case that Donald Trump committed fraud in valuing his real estate properties undermined the narrative of the business career that launched him in politics. Of course, everybody in New York already knew this.
Yes.
This is interesting.
He loved to say it.
Covering it only in the sense that everybody in New York knows this. You don't have to cover this. We all know he's a fraud.
Yes, right. Because, of course, if you're in New York, you think everybody knows what you know, too.
Right. Well, so they have to throw in because it's the New York Times. Of course, none of this is heard as standing in the polls. And whether the effect of Justice
Mr.
Engoron's ruling is any different remains to be seen. But his finding imperils both Mr. Trump's public image and his business empire. The former president now faces not only the prospect of having to pay $250 million in damages, That's $250 million he doesn't have, I would point out.
Right.
But he could also lose properties like Trump Tower that are inextricably linked to his brand.
Yeah. He doesn't
basically
live
it's the
there
death
anymore,
knell.
but that's
It's the
okay.
death sentence of corporations in New York State. That's how the lawyers described it. Because anything that has to do with Trump Incorporated has to dissolve. Trump, organization has
seems
to
like
dissolve.
It might be really huge.
And apparently in 2022, there was a story in the New York Times that in order to try to avoid what he saw coming, Trump actually started a new business, I think in South Carolina, of all places.
Oh, wow.
Called Trump Org 2. and he tried, so he's trying to hide what it was. And he tried to move all the assets.
That's a good hiding spot. Trump Org 2.
So that's a real story. So I don't know what the effect of that was and what happened. But Trump's lawyer in the case, Christopher Keiss, called the ruling outrageous and said the decision would be appealed. And the lawyers looked at it and said, go ahead and appeal.
I guess.
You're going to lose.
Keiss, I mean, we've heard his name before. Is he involved in other cases, or was it always this case that he was doing, and that's how?
Who, Chris Keiss?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think Trump only has like 5 lawyers, so I think they all do everything. In straightforward terms, Justice Engoron punctured Mr. Trump's bubble of protective falsehoods about the way he conducts business. In defendant's world, Justice Engoron wrote, rent-regulated apartments are the same as unregulated apartments. Restricted land is worth the same as unrestricted land. Restrictions can evaporate into thin air. This is a fantasy world, not the real world.
Ooh, well, that's just generally true about him.
Right. Mr. Trump's other weapon of choice, bullying his adversaries. His first weapon of choice is lying, and the second weapon of choice is bullying his adversaries. Yes. And again, according to the courts, I'm not making this up, he's a convicted sex offender. Mr. Trump's third weapon of choice is rape.
Oh, well, he does use that as a weapon.
This month, federal prosecutors asked the judge overseeing his federal election interference case to impose a gag order on him, citing his near-daily social media attacks on people involved in the proceeding and threats they were generating. He blew past an early warning from Judge Chutkan. He's being constrained by the very system he often uses to try to stymie opposition, the courts. In the last 2 years, he's filed a blizzard of legal actions against news networks, political critics, and even the Pulitzer Prize Committee. Several of the states have been dismissed, but Engoron's decision hinted at a trait that's long defined Trump's personality and approach to doing business. He's always sought to create his own reality, often getting away with it up to a point. Part of what's missing here is that Trump is a complete narcissist and a sociopath.
There's no
who basically doesn't have any constraints unless they are put on him.
Yes.
Because he has no limits. He has no borders. He doesn't know how to control himself at all. He doesn't fight back. That's not what he's doing. This isn't Trump fighting back. This is Trump lashing out because he doesn't know what else to do. Yeah. And so how you describe things is important and ought to be described in the terms of what it actually is.
I can agree with that. And I can
agree
with
that. We have traffic on the street, by the way, so Abby's just reminding everybody
fine.
She's still here.
Everybody has opinions, and it's good to have another guest every once in a while.
Yeah. It's important that Trump get called out. It's important that this all be defined as fraud and fake and fraudulent and part of a pattern of what he tries to do. And so, for example, I don't know if you know this, but Joe Biden was the first president ever on a picket line. And the UAW leadership was really thrilled he was there.
Great.
And the people they spoke to on the news were really thrilled he was there, and it's great coverage. And today,
happy is thrilled.
Donald Trump is going to go to a non-union shop, which has to be emphasized. He's not going to talk to the UAW. He's going to a non-union shop to make a speech, which is in direct, competition, if you could call it that, with the snooze fest known as the Republican debate that's tonight that nobody's watching, including you and me.
Right. I'm not.
Right. So,
you too, huh?
It's fraudulent. It's a lie. Trump is not going to talk to the union members in Michigan.
Right.
He's going to talk to a non-union group of people who are trying to make sure that the union loses. He's always been anti-union. That's how it needs to be covered. That's
I don't see how they avoid pointing that out, but I'm always interested to see what creative ways. Okay, well, that's good. He'll be pointing it out.
First attack ad of the season is basically Donald Trump says he's pro-union. He's not. Here's all the ways he's anti-union.
I mean, he's going to a fake rally of people who aren't in a union in order to encourage them not to be in a union, even though the union is striking in the same town. And having just seen some of the writers' strikes settled, you're going to have a hard time convincing people who are actually reading the news that unions aren't worth it. But
right. Actors are still out. But there's a bunch of other union stuff that got settled that, still is good news over the course of the year. Bhavik Laithia from Wisconsin Democratic Party points out that yesterday was a really good news day for Democrats.
Yeah.
Biden will become the first U.S. president to join a picket line. The Supreme Court ruled that Alabama will have fair congressional maps. That's something to talk about.
Oh, all right. Well,
Democratic senators across the country are calling for accountability against corruption. It's up to 25. And Trump got a harsh sentence in New York, leading to the dissolution of his businesses there.
Yeah.
And that's not overstating what happened. The judge said Trump organization and all of the LLCs associated with it have to go bye-bye.
That's pretty good. I would like to. I'm going to read some about the mechanics of what's behind the order, but it's good news for sure. It was interesting to learn that Biden was the first president to be on a picket line for a couple reasons. Well, one was that Obama promised during his campaign that he would do that, and then he didn't do that.
Right. And in fact, Steve Ratner's really upset about it.
I can imagine.
The Obama advisor said, this is ridiculous. He shouldn't be taking sides. He should be siding with the owners.
Oh, all right. Well, that isn't so. That's not so great. But yeah, I did see a lot of griping about that. I didn't dig down into what was going on. I just said, all right, people are mad at him. I'm cool with that. All right.
Because Jeff Stein, economics reporter for the Washington Post, said, it's hard to find a quote here that better summarizes the difference between Obamonomics and Bidenomics.
Okay.
For him to be going on a picket line is outrageous, Stephen Ratner, who headed former President Barack Obama's auto industry task force, said in an interview. There's no precedent for it. The tradition of the president is to stay neutral. I get the politics. The progressives all said, we don't want a mediator. We want an advocate. And he bowed to the progressives. And now he's going out there to put his thumb on the scale, and it's wrong. That's what he said.
Wow. All right.
And there's so much in there that is worth commenting on. First of all,
a lot.
I love Obama. I
Sure.
voted for Obama. I think he was great. He was especially great in terms of what he represented and his rhetoric and, how he could sing. It was all good.
Oh, yes.
But Joe Biden is actually a more progressive president than Obama was. That's just a hard fact.
Yes. I wonder whether if they had served in reverse order, whether it might have been different. I mean, it's easy to follow the act of Obama this way.
So was Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
You can't look at them in 2023 terms and say, look what he said in 1998. It doesn't fit. Whether you're talking about traditional marriage and anything.
What are we talking about?
Things change.
Certainly true. So to some extent the way is paved, but there's no doubt that Biden's a different person and approaches things differently. And for all the rhetoric about, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about his age? There's a certain extent to which his age and experience liberates him to do kind of whatever the hell he wants.
He evolves. You want me to do so? I did that. Been there. Seen it. But things have changed, and so have I. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it's just fascinating to hear the complaints about him.
Yes.
That don't have anything,
especially historically,
because there aren't that many. Because you can't. Right. I mean, he's actually doing a pretty good job. So you have to make stuff up. He wears sneakers. Or as one of the conservative reporters, Peter Ducey for Fox News said, here in Washington, we're on our feet all the time. We all wear sneakers. This is not a story.
Right.
I'm wearing
really
sneakers right now as I'm telling you
this. In fact, the Obama quote where he said he would be on a picket line involved him changing shoes to do it.
Yeah.
So
and the fact is he hasn't been there. But I, as a union family, I love to see Biden out there. It's great. There's nothing wrong with it. And Steve Ratner's a jerk, but that's okay. He represents the owners.
Yeah. Ratner's comment is interesting in a number of levels, not the least of which it's interesting that he goes to the history of it, unprecedented, and presidents are supposed to be neutral and above the fray. But that hasn't been the history either. I mean, the actual history of presidential involvement in union conflict to the early 20th century was, let's send the army and shoot the Union guys. That wasn't exactly neutral arbitration and staying above the fray. So it's not just, well, no president has ever been on a picket line. No president has ever really been explicitly on the side of striking workers, up to and including, well, we should probably just shoot them because that's communism. So it's nice, to say the least, to see not, and I don't know that balances history to say, well, I'll just be neutral. I'm coming a lot closer to balancing history to the extent that's important to anyone by saying, not only is there a right to strike, they are right to strike. They have that right and they're right to do it. So not bad. That gives you an idea of just how historic it is. We look at it as, well, all right, so he went and stood on a picket line. But if you don't acknowledge the history of people used to get killed doing this, I guess you don't get the full import of it.
Well, again, Ratner was in the position of trying to negotiate with the big three.
Yeah.
And Biden is not negotiating a deal here. He's just supporting the workers and making a point. And so, this reminds me of the probably apocryphal FDR line. I agree with you. Now make me do it. Well,
okay.
This election is making him do it.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay. Well, he's open to being made to do it, and people are making him do it, and I guess that works just fine. Yeah. Unions are older than he is. So.
Well, no, he's older than dirt. So.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back in 1642, Biden said.
That could be. He's not actually that old. All right. Well, we got to take a short break. I might pick it against myself for 2 minutes just to get some exercise doing it, and we'll be right back with more news because there's no stopping. I'm
going to tell you what UAW said about Trump.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
He was born in Kokomo, Indiana.
Weren't we all? Welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, this time with music. We figured out during the break, and by figured out, I mean, I heard Greg say, where's the music? And by the way, for the fact that the music wasn't playing on your end, it was playing on my end. Music's always going on in my head. It's circus calliope music, but still, so I didn't have all the correct buttons pressed, and that's what was going on when people thought, hey, you're not coming through on the air at the beginning of the show, and then poof, all of a sudden there I was. The music was not set right, but I was going to say, for not being able to hear the music, you timed your exit so perfectly. I was so shocked when you said you couldn't hear the music. So now we're back. I'll have to edit some music in later. Maybe not. But there's definitely more news, and that has nothing to do with my
I'd like
skills.
to tell you I'm a complete professional, but the fact is I'm a rank amateur. I just happen to be looking at the clock.
Amazing. All right. Well, clock, that works too. And all right, we move on. There was more about...
Clock works. Yeah, so Sean Fine, who is the UAW president, had a lot of not nice things to say about Donald Trump, who is speaking in a non-union shop today, and he's well aware of that. And he says, I find the pathetic irony that the former president is going to have a rally for union members at a non-union business Well, his track record speaks for itself. Workers. In 2008, during the Great Recession, he blamed UAW members.
Oh.
And the UAW official, he told that to Wolf Blitzer. That's a quote. Mm-hmm. UAW official Twitter feed says, in 2019, when Donald Trump was the president of the United States, where was he then? Our workers at GM were on strike for 2 months out there on the picket lines. I didn't see him hold a rally. I didn't see him stand up at the picket line. And I sure as hell didn't hear him comment about it, said Sean Fine, UAW president.
All right. The answer here is the same as it is with everything else. He's got
He's a fraud.
A fraudulent university, fraudulent charity, fraudulent business, and today a fraudulent rally for workers who aren't actually union workers. And ordinarily he would just hire actors to pretend, but they're on strike, so he can't do that.
Right. Oh, the judge, by the way, in that fraud case, pointed out just a number of other things besides the fact that Trump is living in fantasy land.
He also sucks.
One of the things that Eric Trump is complaining about is the valuation that the judge gave to Mar-a-Lago.
10 cents.
Well, Trump claimed it was worth $1.5 billion. And the judge said that's preposterous. Its assessed value for taxes is 18 to 27 million.
Mm-hmm. And that's plenty. 18 to, what? That's less, actually, than
the judge didn't rule that Mar-a-Lago is worth 18 million. He said its assessed value is 18 to 27 million.
Well,
that's a fact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Claiming that it's worth $1.5 billion in that context is, in fact, preposterous.
He's
and
right
so
about
says
that.
the judge, and it's ruled in court, and so it's true.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's on paper right here. This is the assessed value, and there's
just
no
one
incentive
example. There are
for
many
Florida
examples.
to lower their
and so, again, I'm not a lawyer. You are. You have to explain this to me. But this was not part of a settlement or a trial result.
Right.
This is what was called a summary judgment, which in my non-lawyer understanding is, oh, gosh, the facts are just so much on one side, the judge could say, we don't even need a trial for this.
That is about right, yeah. What they're basically saying is, well, in order to get to win a summary judgment, the judge is asked to evaluate things, and it basically has to find that if we find that all facts are as the non-movement says. So if the prosecution moves for summary judgment, we'll look at the defendant and say, if all the facts are as the defendant would have them, would state, and if the court were to assume that they were right and about all of this, it's still true as a matter of law that you lose. That would be you'd win a summary judgment there. We don't have any issues of fact that to present to a jury that can affect the outcome of this case. If the case is decided correctly, they'll hear all of this news, and the law basically says that we would have to instruct them. You have to find the defendant guilty if you find this, this, and this, assuming the best case scenario for the defendant, this, and this are still true. So there's really no point in swearing you in and having you hear evidence. I can say as a matter of law, without having to find any facts, because I assume them all in the defendant's favor, it still doesn't work.
Right, and so this is a partial summary judgment, meaning some of it still goes to trial. So we could lose twice on this. This is great.
All right.
This is the gift that keeps on giving. There's other stuff that's buried in here, too, which is absolutely going to come out in the next couple of days. One of them is that they were arguing about why, Trump's properties weren't really overvalued. And Trump basically said, first of all, in the Mar-a-Lago case, I got a guy in Florida who says it's worth that much. The judge says, well, he says it's worth that much, but he doesn't prove it. And then elsewhere buried in this is a footnote that said that, and Trump said, and besides, it's worth anything I say it is because I could always sell it to Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And you look at that and say, why is that not influence peddling?
Yeah, right. Well, people said that the emoluments thing, they weird and confused. I'm just an unfrozen caveman citizen, and I don't understand the Constitution. That's called taking a bribe.
What's that law that says that you can't, campaign while you're in formal office?
Hatch Act.
I think the one that Mark Meadows has never heard of.
Yeah, right. And that's
he probably made fun of the Emoluments Act too.
He probably did. He probably named his company
they're still law, and they still matter.
Yeah. Then, as it turns out, well, as you know, they live by the principle that ignorance is an excuse. Ignorance of the law is a great excuse. And
anyway, I didn't want to forget about that stuff. I mean, this is just such a profound ruling that I don't even think it's sunk in yet. The Times got it right when it said this goes to the heart of who Trump says he is, not who Trump is. We know he's a fraud,
right?
But it's who he says he is. It goes to the heart of that, and really, takes a lot of that apart. Now, as far as the union stuff, Bosangood points out something really important. When it comes to Steve Ratner and people like him.
Yes. Okay. Let's point that out then.
And says, you know what? You're saying that the president should be neutral. Was Ronald Reagan neutral with the air traffic controllers?
Right. Good point. Recent memory. You don't have to go back to the 1890s.
He was anti-union. We've had presidents who were clearly anti-union.
Yes. Murdering union people.
And now we have one that's pro-union.
Yeah. And obviously so. Not even just, they have the right to strike, but actually I support them in their strike. There's difference there too.
Right.
Nice.
All right. Let's turn to Bob Menendez.
All right.
And only to turn away from Bob Menendez. So far, I was watching the list in real time, and there were a couple of reporters that were really working hard to try to keep up with the Democratic senators, which had been, I think, in the morning 5, and by the end of the day were 25, who said that he needs to step down. And they were coming like every 5 minutes. And I want to know who the coordinator was who said, okay, you go, now you go, now you go. Because there was some stage manager. They didn't do it at the same time. But they came one after the other. It was really hard to keep up. And so, kudos to those people who were really, really working hard to try to make sure that, in fact, we had them all. Okay. And for those of you, again, who are complaining, where's Gillibrand? Where's Klobuchar? They said this about Al Franken. Well, they also said this about Menendez.
Oh, well, then all right.
They were among the 25 who said you need to resign.
Well, then what do you who's complaining? I want to know because it's all out there.
You're better off listening to people who didn't say he should be resigned. And in fact, Debbie Stabenow he shouldn't resign in the morning and he should resign in the afternoon. People are changing their mind on this. Tester, Warren, Warnock, Welsh, Murphy from Connecticut, Blumenthal from Connecticut as well. Cory Booker was a big one yesterday because he's from New Jersey.
Right.
Now, Schumer hasn't said that yet. He's going to protect his caucus. He's not going to say anything until the end. So that's not in the least bit surprising, nor should it be a negative against him. There's other people that need to come out. Manchin said leave him alone. Cortez Masto said leave him alone. It's like 5 senators on the Democratic side who said leave him alone. Republicans aren't saying anything except John Cornyn, who was pretty funny.
Britney Spears says leave him alone.
Leave him alone. So a reporter asked John Cornyn whether he thought Menendez should resign, and he said, I think all the Democrats should resign. I thought it was a great line.
It's not bad, given that it's John Cornyn.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, all right.
But, the fact of the matter is there's 2 things going on here with Republicans. Number one, they wouldn't mind a wounded Menendez going up in an election, so they want to see him stick around. But I think more importantly to them, they do not want reporters asking them, well, how come you think an indicted Menendez needs to step down, but you got this guy named Trump, who's the leader of your party, who's been indicted 91 times. Who's a proven fraudster and sex offender in court. And you're defending him. What's up with that? So they don't want to deal with that, and so they're not saying anything.
Not to mention George Santos, who should be
Not to mention George Santos, but especially
But I am mentioning George Santos. Yes. George Santos. All right. So, regular gimmitarianism there. The better thing to do strategically is John Cornyn's things. That's not John Corzine. It's John Cornyn. Yes. Everybody. All Democrats should resign. Why not?
Corzine from New Jersey, too?
Yeah. I don't know if they asked him because he's not I guess he's not in elective office. That's certainly true.
There were, of course, people were talking about New Jersey yesterday. It was really hard not to.
Why? What the hell? Shut up, all you idiots. Get out of here.
Yeah. Well, one person asked Cortez Masto about whether or not Menendez should step down.
Mm-hmm.
And she said no. And the reporter said, well, aren't you worried that that's going to hurt the Democrats in New Jersey? And she said, it's New Jersey. And then the reporter added in parentheses, I don't know what that means.
Oh.
So I tweeted, I do.
Yeah, right.
And
That's
John
right.
Fetterman.
It also means, don't look at me. I'm from Nevada.
Yeah. John Fetterman was even more explicit about it. He was asked if he'd support a primary challenge to Menendez, and he said, hell yeah. The last time there was a guy in New Jersey with this much cash in his house was Tony Soprano.
Hey, he's not real. Okay.
Fetterman has great social media skills.
Yes, well, he's a person.
And as people who work for him say, you think his staff is writing this? You don't know John Fetterman.
Yeah. Well,
just like Charles Grassley writes his own stuff, and you can tell.
It's true. Extra letters in it, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or rambling anecdotes about, 1842 or whatever,
Yes.
They're actually Chuck Grassley. He's actually writing these. Well, Fetterman's writing
I do believe that, and I believe that about Fetterman too. And it actually kind of poignant. It wasn't that long ago that he was having such difficulty post-stroke, and there was all sorts of attacks on him and everything. And now, seeing how keenly attuned he is to this stuff and the comments he has to make on it, what a tremendous frustration that must have been for him not to be able to express himself the way he knows he can and the way he's used to. And so it doesn't surprise me that he would have developed these terrific social media instincts, especially if it was actually easier for him to communicate that way.
Right.
But he was always, I think, just kind of that kind of guy, right? That's the shtick, regular guy.
Who he is.
Yep.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you have a guy who had a stroke and is coming back from depression and is taking such joy in being himself.
Yes,
whether it's what he wears
he
or whether it's what he says, he's living life like you're supposed to.
Yeah, and it's
you don't like how I dress?
Great to see.
Well, look, there are people in suits and ties who double childhood poverty, so don't give me a hard time about it.
Right. Not only that, but I guess he could just stand next to you and say, "Make me." Oh, yeah.
That's what somebody else said. Point. John Tester said that, who's also a large person, said that Menendez should resign. And somebody asked on Twitter, why doesn't Tester just eat him? There's just so much bigger than he is.
Yeah. Well, they're well behaved for the most part, these Democratic senators. All senators are reasonably well behaved when it comes to eating other senators. It wasn't always the case.
They tend not to. There's probably, a rule about that.
Yes.
You can't do it Monday through Thursday when they're in session, or maybe they're only there Tuesday and Wednesdays. I don't know. It's hard to tell with the Senate. So you're moving me to talk about what's going on in the House, based on rules and decorum and such.
Yes.
So based on what we know right now, says Punchbowl, it seems exceedingly likely the federal government's going to shut down for the weekend. Full stop. Could change. Fast-moving situation. The Senate will pass stuff. The Senate will pass a bipartisan stopgap funding bill. It will not pass till Sunday because Rand Paul won't agree to unanimous consent because it's got money for Ukraine in there, and Rand Paul is a Russian tool. And he probably has Ron Johnson with him.
They should get that guy out of there. All right. Kentucky has just a lot of Russians, I guess.
So that'll pass Sunday. But Sunday is when the government closes down. So once the Senate passes it on Sunday, they have to hand it over to the House, and then the House has to do something with it, and that's why there's going to be a shutdown. And so, basically, the rules of the game are that McCarthy can only pass a continuing resolution because he can't get all the money bills passed by then, even though they actually succeeded in passing a rule yesterday about one of them.
Oh, congratulations.
Congratulations to them, low bar. They have a bunch of spending bills to pass. They can't get it done by Sunday. They're not even sure they can pass them. And so the continuing resolution is the only thing that's going to keep the government open. And it can't happen before the shutdown because Rand Paul won't let it. But it will happen in the Senate. They'll jam the House. The House will have no choice but to take it up. McCarthy's plan is to say, I have to pass everything with Republican votes, and he can't. So he has to prove that he can't by not having enough votes to pass anything by Sunday. And once that happens,
to me, I believe
this is how Kabuki works.
Yeah.
Then he can say to his conference, look, I tried doing it your way. It's not working. I'm going to have to use Democrats. And if you don't like it, go ahead and you can make a motion to vacate and try to get rid of me. You'll fail. I guess it's a resolution. And so go ahead. But I had to do this, and I proved to you I had to do this by waiting for the last minute and having all of your ideas fail. I did everything you told me to do, and it still didn't work. Therefore, I have to do this. And
I'm not
so
sure they buy
that's
that
not
logic.
going to take place until Monday at the earliest. And so you'll see McCarthy say, I still have a plan. I still have an idea. I won't do it that way. I can't do it that way. But, his Matt Rosendale from Montana, Republican, is a great example of why that's not going to work. I will not vote for a continuing resolution. It doesn't matter what you attach to it.
Okay.
You got people in your conference who are saying that. It means you're going to have Democratic votes to make it pass. They would be happy to keep the government shut down forever. Not going to happen. And by the way, this time, for whatever reason, I guess because they didn't pass the defense part of it, the military won't get paid. There's just going to be so much pressure on them.
Honor the troops.
And they are going to be such big losers. McCarthy understands this, and the rest of his conference does not. And so Matt Gaetz is already talking about putting up a motion to vacate. And everybody is just sort of gaming it out. To the punch bowl summary is probably pretty accurate. Assuming there's a shutdown, McCarthy's best case scenario is to convince the Senate to negotiate with him on a CR, continuing resolution, to reopen the government while extracting wins on the border. That's going to be a tall task. McCarthy's already struggling. And again, you have to see it from McCarthy's point of view. The reason that McCarthy wants a negotiation with the Senate on, let's say, border provisions, or, as he called for, a negotiation with Biden, which quickly was shot down, is because McCarthy's looking for somebody else to blame. Okay. If he gets a chance to speak with them and say, well, it wasn't my fault, it was their fault. I tried to talk to them about it, and they wouldn't, And the best way to deal with that is not even talk to him.
He should demand negotiations with ChatGPT.
He should demand negotiations with Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, well, that's too much for
Gaetz basically said, look, this shutdown isn't the Democrats' fault. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's nearly a direct quote.
Oh.
And it isn't the Freedom Caucus's fault. This is strictly a fault of Kevin McCarthy.
I mean, he wants to say that.
And I looked at him and said, gosh, he's right.
Oh. Yeah, I mean,
because all McCarthy had to do is say, look, I'm going to get Democrats and moderate Republicans to line up with me, and I'll outvote you. Done.
Okay.
He won't until,
he just has to
as
wait.
we said, until Monday. But, that's the deal.
I see. So, I don't even know why. I guess maybe he's thinking the rest of the country will be more logical. I tried it their way, and it didn't work, so I tried it this other way. But I don't know if they're going to buy it, and
I don't know if anybody's going to buy it.
He could just go
that's
right
what everybody's
to it now.
telling him. Kevin, this is not going to work. It's stupid.
Yeah. You could just try it the other way now.
I don't think it's stupid. And people are saying, well, Kevin, that's the problem. The problem isn't that your idea is stupid. It's that you're stupid.
Yeah. Well, I guess these people just care more about shutting down the government than you do, Kevin.
Axios, McCarthy's personal peril intensifies funding fight. Why it matters. The right's escalating threats to remove McCarthy if he cuts a deal with Democrats may force the speaker to choose between the leadership position he long coveted and heading off a government shutdown. I mean, that's not even a choice. He's going to choose leadership. We all know that. That's why we are where we are.
Retain it. I don't know. I mean,
the question is next week, will he do that after the government's already shut down?
Yes.
We still don't know. He's probably still going to choose leadership. McCarthy may even face a damned if you do, damned if you don't. As some GOP lawmakers say, a government shutdown could be yet another trigger for an effort to remove him. And that's what I was saying about Gaetz.
Yeah. That's what he wants to do. I don't know whether he really has. Don't forget that in all of this, Gaetz is also monumentally incompetent as well.
But the point is Gaetz says, I won't agree, and my colleagues and I won't agree to anything you propose. And McCarthy say, well, how about this? And Gaetz says, no. How about this? Gaetz says, no. Well, if you don't do that, we're going to shut down. And Gaetz says, well, go ahead, shut down. Then they shut down, and Gaetz says, well, the reason they shut down is McCarthy.
I mean, he wants people to believe that. I don't know that
yeah,
they will.
But you know what? It's true.
In a way.
Because McCarthy keeps trying to cave to him, and it's not going to work.
Yeah.
See Matt Rosendale.
Well, yeah, but then if the government opens up again, it's interesting. It's always difficult for me to figure out how a shutdown and recovery from shutdown is going to be perceived because I'm watching this too closely, and it doesn't give me the opportunity to understand it from a million miles away as most people view it. I don't know. It was shut and now it's open. So I guess McCarthy engineered something. Yes, it'll make the Freedom Caucus is all about setting up a fight with McCarthy if he, quote unquote, makes a deal with Democrats. But I don't even know that they're going to, one, I don't know whether people would think in general, the general population,
if it's shut,
the deal with Democrats is a good idea.
And they'll know who to blame, and it's Republicans. And then if Republicans open it only by dealing with Democrats, and Republicans start yelling at McCarthy for opening it because he only deals with Democrats, I don't see how even like normie people who don't pay attention could not be aware that McCarthy and the Republicans were the problem.
Yeah, they'll certainly blame them for the shutdown, but I'm not certain that it will work to Gates's advantage. Normies will then say, but now the government is open again, which means, as it says here in the papers, he made a deal with Democrats. That's bipartisanship. It's a good thing. Gates is a weirdo. Yeah, so Gates wins nothing from this in the end.
Gates absolutely cannot win anything from this.
And
but again, Gates is even dumber than McCarthy.
The chair. Yeah, or even if he wins the motion, if he somehow wins the motion to vacate the chair, then the normies say, I don't understand. And who's going to be speaker? And the answer is no one. And then everybody says, that Gates guy, he's crazy. He just effed up the whole government again. And I don't think that's a winner.
What I don't know yet, and I'm guessing will happen, is that if there is a motion to vacate, Democrats will support the speaker.
I do not know. Maybe. Probably just because so they can continue on to do things. But I don't know how often.
So they can say a big F you to Gates.
Yeah. That's always, I mean, in the choice of the lesser of two evils, I think they'd rather give the finger to Gates than McCarthy. If McCarthy's, if
that's your choice,
yeah. I mean, I guess Gates, he's
think
worse,
of it this
right?
way. If they were running against each other and you had to vote for one of them, I'd vote for McCarthy.
Yeah, but I don't know how frequently they will be willing to do it. So Gates could find an opportunity and say, "Well, there's no limit on how many times I make this motion. I'm just going to keep doing it over and over."
No, and there's no limit to how often you can shut the government down. Right. And this is not going to be the last shutdown for this session.
If they have to do things through either continuing resolutions or a reasonable facsimile thereof,
it's just it kicks the can down the road 30 to 45 days, depending upon which one you accept.
Mm-hmm. And
it's going to happen again.
They got a lot of work to do to pass all these appropriations bills. Plus, they gave themselves some stupid limitations that they'll immediately regret because it'll make the work that much longer. / not regret because it makes the chaos last longer, and they love chaos. The Freedom Caucus people will enjoy that. The rest of the Republican conference will not. All right. Well, what can I tell you? It would be very exciting to vacate the chair, except I don't know who would occupy it thereafter.
Well, give us something to talk about. We like talking about procedure. That is to say, I like badgering you about it because I think it's fascinating, and there it is.
Yeah, it'll be one of those the Chinese curse thing.
It'll be one of those. Hey, remember when we talked about vacate the chair 6 months ago? Well,
yeah. Now you know why we did.
Now you know why we were talking about it.
And when we say vacate, that doesn't mean Kevin McCarthy gets to go on a vacation. It means there's no Speaker of the House, and we don't know how long that'll. And we saw how long it took to get him into the chair. Nobody wanted it, and 15 ballots. And how many ballots will it take to elect somebody else that no one likes? Kevin McCarthy.
So in the 2 minutes left for us, before I don't hear the music or hear
you
the
will
music,
this time,
as the case may be, Vanity Fair, Molly Jong-Fast has a little piece about let's not sleepwalk into another Trump presidency. The GOP frontrunner's treason talk makes clear yet again that he's a danger to democracy, reminding everybody he basically threatened to go after Mark Milley. And the fact that people aren't talking about this every day is itself a scandal.
Yeah, but then he said John McCain wasn't a hero; he was a loser. And
right, and so she's saying you can't normalize this stuff. This is who he is, and you got to talk about it a lot.
All right,
Eric Levitz has, I think, an even better piece in the New York Magazine Intelligencer section, Trump wants his enemies to fear for their lives. And he talks about the fact that, he's encouraging violence all the time. And it's not hypothetical. And the problem for the press, it hasn't dominated national news coverage. Indeed, he writes, Trump's remarks about Milley scarcely registered in the headlines. Yeah. The fact that the leader of the Republican Party is an authoritarian who tacitly and sometimes explicitly encourages political violence may have lost some novelty over the past 7 years, but it's shed none of its menace or import. So the mainstream press is in a tough position. It's published reams of excellent reporting on Trump's scandals and no shortage of op-eds denouncing him. The plurality of voters who support Trump over Biden in many recent polls are not ignorant of the ex-president's contempt for election results or threats. They either believe that Trump's conduct is justified, given the deep state, or they simply don't care. Therefore, the electorate, the Republican Party, and every organ of mainstream conservatism are treating Trump as though he was an ordinary presidential candidate. So in this context, a news outlet can cover Trump's affronts to democracy, but it can't internalize them. For such a publication to fully behave as though it has a working memory and a capacity to rationally weigh the significance would be for it to resemble a partisan rag. The most salient truth about the 2024 election is that the Republican Party is poised to nominate an authoritarian thug who publishes rationalizations for political violence and promises to abuse presidential authority on a near daily basis, who, by the way, according to the courts, at least, is a fraud and a sex offender. There is no way, I added that, there is no way for a paper or news channel to appropriately emphasize this reality without sounding like a shrill, dull, Democratic propaganda outlet. So he's outlining the problem here.
Reality has a liberal bias.
If the press tells the truth, it's going to sound like they're slanting to the Democrats.
Yeah.
So, like the nation writ large, the press comports itself as an amnesiac, an abusive household committed to keeping up appearances, losing itself in the old routines in an effortful approximation of normality until it almost forgets what it doesn't want to know. I think that's absolutely right.
Yes.
The press is completely guilty of this. They're acting like abused people who basically are trying to pretend that everything's normal when in fact it is not.
Are we supposed to? We might have to end up thinking this is not their fault. They have been abused. Well, we hear the music. We obey the music. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I feel like we have a lot to catch up on. Greg did mention that there's a path, or people are beginning down the path on the Senate side, looking for a way to force an end to the shutdown that's coming up. I mean, as you pointed out, I don't think there's any way of getting around the shutdown at this point, even though the headline, one of 600 that are in my email inbox, that are, updates from various publications. Of course, the most aggressive being The Hill. Alexander Bolton at The Hill, one of their top writers, has this headline: Senate grabs wheel from House in bid to avoid shutdown. This is all, of course, was addressed yesterday by Joan, and we're getting a little bit of an update from Greg, and we'll run through the procedure very quickly and see what Bolton gives us. He's usually on top of this, and I don't have to do a great deal of filling in the blanks with his work ordinarily, I think, unless I just have this unreasonably sunny view of everything he does. Senate leaders are grabbing the steering wheel from embattled Speaker Kevin McCarthy in hopes of avoiding a wreck in the form of a government shutdown at the end of the week. Here, we differ. I don't think they really have any serious hopes of avoiding the wreck. I just don't think they have the time left on the calendar to get this done. But let's catch up with what's happened and what still needs to happen in order to figure this out. Senators in both parties, both sides, have lost confidence in McCarthy's ability to move a stopgap funding measure, not a CR. I mean, ordinarily they would be calling it that, and I don't know whether this is consciously chosen because it wouldn't really be a continuing resolution if it matches up with the demands of not only the Freedom Caucus, but the bulk of the Republican caucus at this point. So he may be using the term advisedly, or avoiding CR advisedly, but maybe not. Senators in both parties have lost confidence in McCarthy, right, and his ability to move a stopgap funding measure through the House and hope to avoid a disaster by moving first, which you'll remember, Joan reminded you, they're not really entitled to do constitutionally because it's a spending bill. It needs to originate in the House. And we all know the trick that the Senate sometimes uses, i.e. always uses, to get around that. They can take up a House-initiated bill that is languishing in the Senate for whatever reason and no action has been taken, and they can strike out everything in the body of the bill, keep the number and the House designation, so it'll still be an HR bill, and just substitute what they've written. It is really kind of dumb that they allow this, but, it's the sort of, rationalizing that allows the government to continue to function from time to time. Otherwise, we'd be at the mercy of a bunch of idiots like the Freedom Caucus all the time, and instead we're at the mercy of a bunch of idiots like the Senate. And, will the Senate afford itself? Are they going to rule in their own favor and continue to say that this is A-OK? Sure, because it gives them power, and this is how they jam the House. And they always have this ability, and it's kind of interesting, and I like the thinking. It's very clever workaround, even if it really shouldn't be allowed to happen. Anyway, back to the substance of it. On Tuesday, they took the first step forward by advancing their stopgap bill to keep federal funding at current levels, which would make it a CR, until November 17th. The legislation would also provide $6.15 billion in new money for Ukraine and $6 billion in new money for disaster relief. I guess when we add things on top of current levels of funding, they're not calling it a CR in this article so far, but historically that would probably work. And just by way of clarifying the terminology, usually when we're dealing with a continuing resolution, CR, there's at least one side calling for a clean CR. And to remind you the difference between a clean CR and whatever the opposite of a clean CR, dirty, I assume people would want to gravitate to that, although there's nothing particularly dirty about it. It's just the opposite of clean. But a clean CR is just a CR. We're going to take current funding levels as they now stand as a matter of law, having passed the various appropriations bills, and just continue that level of funding for X number of days, weeks, months, hours, minutes, nanoseconds, whatever unit they choose, and everything continues as it has been for this amount of time. Then you can muck up CRs by adding additional funding, and they almost always do. It's very rarely anymore just a clean CR. It's relatively clean. They'll try and keep the extraneous material to a minimum sometimes just to make people happy. But there's almost always a rider of some kind or another, and it's, I guess, rather subjective. At what point does the level of change you're making render this not a CR? And I guess the answer is when you start monkeying with different accounts that are existing regular appropriations accounts and say we're going to cut this one or boost this one, as opposed to adding special emergency funding as they're discussing here, like Ukraine, which at this point is no longer, it's not a surprise or an emergency, and it really could be part of regular appropriations, but they're keeping it an emergency for these purposes so that they can get this stuff passed, and also disaster relief. And then, of course, you can redefine what kind of disaster you're talking about, like the disaster of not being able to pay for XYZ project at the moment. That's a disaster. Boom, disaster relief. You can add it to a CR. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer described it as a bridge funding bill, not to fund bridges, but, to bridge the gap between now and when we've settled all this crap. A bridge funding bill to keep the government open another month, buying more time for negotiators to hash out a longer-term funding deal. This is not going to be the final proposal for the whole year, he said. The Senate plan is to pass the continuing resolution by Thursday or Friday. That would be tomorrow or Friday. And send it over to the House before government funding technically expires at 11:59 p.m. Saturday. Why? Well, we just love Saturdays. No. In fact, it is the end of the month. The fiscal year ends on September 30th. We have all the way to 11:59 on September 30th. That's Saturday. So that's the answer to that one. But I think, well, didn't Joan mention, I guess they were bringing a cloture motion to the floor first thing this week, and then they maybe did pass their cloture motion. But I guess you have, I don't know, I didn't double check on that to make sure I remember it correctly. I'm sure she told us correctly. How do I remember it? Even if they wanted to pass this measure, of course, Greg reminded us Rand Paul stands in the way, so they're not going to get unanimous consent. Things could have moved faster, and they could have handed it over to the House earlier only for them to fail or whatever and force a government shutdown anyway. But then everyone would have seen them have ostensibly enough time to do the work, but then fail to do the work. So Senate throws them a little bit of an assist by delaying things. Maybe that's what Rand Paul has in mind. Maybe he's just genuinely opposed to Ukrainian freedom. That's certainly likely true. Anyway, so they had to go through jump through the usual hoops. One senator opposes something that the rest of the Senate wants to see done. It's going to take them a couple of days. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't passed or adopted the cloture resolution. But then even once they adopt a cloture resolution, there are up to 30 hours that you can waste afterwards, and I guess that's what brings us to Thursday or Friday for the passage of the actual bill underlying this whole thing. Senators are betting that if they jam the House, Greg's new favorite term, jam the House right before the deadline, McCarthy will relent and bring it to the House floor, where it would likely pass in a bipartisan vote. Lots of different definitions to what jamming means and different mechanisms used to jam the House. Not the least of which, one we haven't really discussed, is using artificial deadlines of one kind or another to constrain the House's options, kind of presenting them with a take it or leave it proposition. This happens all the time. Not only does the Senate jam the House, sometimes there are many ways that they can do it. We've described it lately in terms of their ability to say, my hands are tied. You want X, I want X, but I can't give it to you because someone in my chamber, the Senate, will filibuster, and we just don't have the votes to get around them, or the time to muster the votes to get around them, or the time we can get the votes to get around them, but we don't have the time to afford to post-cloture time, etc., and that gets to another methodology of jamming. But sometimes they just point to the filibuster and say, we can't get to this because we can't get 60 votes for that, so you're going to have to go back and give us something that can get 60 votes. Sometimes it is jamming the House by saying, well, we'll take one of your bills that has nothing to do with any spending and erase all of it and turn it into a spending bill and then hand it back to you in order to put the ball in your court. You're languishing, you're negotiating with one another, but there's no bill on the floor and there's no bill ready to point to say you're not doing your job. Well, we'll create one by jamming you, by erasing what's in one of your HR bills and handing it back to you as a Senate-drafted spending bill, even though we're not supposed to do that. A second methodology of jamming. A third methodology of jamming, using the calendar. And there's a little bit of this now going on, whether it's the end of the session coming up or whether it's a deadline that's hard and fast, like the end of the fiscal year coming up, or whether it's a soft deadline that everyone wants to treat as a hard deadline, like Christmas is coming and we don't want to be working on it because we only honor one religion in this country, or whatever. Or someone has restaurant reservations for Valentine's Day, for instance. So that was the Senate jamming itself, of course. Or whatever is coming up, whether it be recess or the end of the fiscal year or just a weekend. Like you want to be gone for the weekend, then you're going to have to take care of this business. They very often will they plan from the beginning, very often in the Senate to say, well, we'll do our part here, and we'll move first and we'll take care of business and then hand it over to the House. And if they want to avoid a shutdown or they want to get their work done before the weekend or the holiday or the recess or whatever the deadline is, they're just going to have to take what we give them, because if they amend it and send it back, this deadline passes and bad things happen, and there's no way we're going to be around for the weekend because we're going to pass this thing on Thursday and then adjourn and be gone, and we're just not coming back. Even though technically the House could say, all right, we'll pass it on Friday, but we're amending it and we're sending it back to the Senate. And the Senate says, well, what do you want us to do? We're out of town. I don't know. Do you want to shut down the government? Because the solution is right in front of you. For some reason, it's just one of those things, right? Like when Democrats claim one thing and Republicans claim another, the newspapers print that the Republicans are making the valid argument and Democrats should bend to their will somehow. And we all complain and cry about it. And that's just one of the things they do. Well, similarly, they say, nothing I could do. The Senate left town. Well, there's actually fewer senators than there are House members. You could get a quorum of the Senate back easier with fewer plane tickets than a quorum in the House. So why don't they come back? Well, because they're very important people and they're away on vacation. Yeah, so, I mean, you'd be fired if you said, I'm sorry, boss, I'm just not doing the work because I'm leaving early for the weekend. Well, you get your ass back here and get the work finished or you're fired. Oh, yeah, well, of course they're not in that position. It's another way of jamming people, or of the Senate jamming the House. They point to the schedule. And here they've got a hard and fast deadline they didn't have to invent, so they're going to use it. The Senate 6 times a year will do this to the House. I mean, more or less, I don't know. But several times in any given year, we'll use the schedule as leverage against the House. All right, so where were we on this? Right, we have until 11:59 p.m. Saturday to get this all done. Will they be able to do it? Will anybody be able to do it? Senators are betting that if they jam the House right before the deadline, McCarthy will relent and bring it to the House floor where it would likely pass in a bipartisan vote. We'll see. Senate leaders kept the details of the bill secret until shortly before Tuesday's procedural vote. There's the answer about what procedural vote? That would probably be the cloture motion that Joan told us about yesterday. Tuesday's procedural vote to give potential critics less time to derail it. That's why they kept it secret. Schumer described the measure as a stripped-down stopgap. That is, stripped down would mean closer to clean, basically. Stopgap measure designed to avoid controversy and keep federal departments and agencies operating through the next month. He hailed the bipartisan support for the bill in the Senate and challenged McCarthy to put it up for a vote in the House. Let us hope that we get as many people on both sides of the aisle voting for this product, and that the House understands that bipartisanship there is the only way to go to avoid a shutdown, Schumer said shortly before the vote, knowing that they are pledged to not doing that, which is just fine for him politically. It paints it as the Republicans' fault, which it is, so fine. Still, to get the bill through the Senate, Democrats may need to make additional concessions. Several Republican senators told The Hill they would like to see changes to the bill, even though they voted to get onto the legislative vehicle that will carry it forward, i.e. they voted for cloture so that debate could begin on this thing. I voted to get onto the process, but I didn't vote for the final bill. You haven't been asked to yet. So I do think there will be some changes, said Senator Shelley Moore Capito. I only remember that I had trouble deciding how to pronounce her name. And no matter how many times I look it up or listen to it, will I ever remember? I will only remember the controversy in my own mind about how to pronounce it. But you know who I'm talking about, the Republican from West Virginia, the one that's actually a Republican currently right now, like openly. Okay. A member of the Appropriations Committee, of course, is Senator Capito. And Senate GOP leadership team. Oh, okay. I've mangled everything. She's a member of the Appropriations Committee and the GOP leadership team. Rick Scott from Florida, who's a super jerk and really weird looking, wants to add $16.5 billion to the disaster relief fund, calling the amount included in the stopgap totally inadequate for Floridians. But as you know, he needs to get personal credit for adding it. And basically, I guess they'll just allow him to engineer it. It's his state. There's not much you're going to be able to do to stand in the way of it. Another Republican senator who requested anonymity said some Republican priorities were left out of the bill without naming which ones. Okay, good. We're not supposed to, I guess, that's not supposed to be our reaction, but duh, I mean, fantastic. Anyway, McCarthy in recent days has vented his frustration over being held hostage by a handful of conservatives, who this month derailed consideration of a House Republican-crafted stopgap spending measure, as well as the annual defense appropriations bill. By the way, excellent plan on their behalf. They're going to, of course, attempt a coup to take over the country. And before they do it, they are going to stop paying all of the soldiers. They're going to attack the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And what else were they? I forgot what. Oh, yeah, right. They're also going. This was in the news today. I guess General Milley has a book coming out in which he claims that, I guess at his, if I saw correctly, they were calling it like a welcoming ceremony, maybe? Is that what they, which I guess was his, I took to mean his, sort of like what would be his inauguration, I guess. A welcoming ceremony, welcoming him as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I guess back in 2019, at which ceremony he arranged to have a wounded veteran sing God Bless America. Okay, I mean, pretty standard stuff, I think, right? But apparently the story is that Donald Trump was grousing to him about that. Nobody wants to see wounded people. Get that out of here. I don't want to see. He actually says that to him. No one wants to see that. And apparently, allegedly, banned Milley from bringing this particular wounded veteran, anyway, and maybe all wounded veterans, back for any joint appearances. So that's going to work great for the coup, I think. Don't pay him, attack the general, and say, you know what's really disgusting? I don't like to see wounded veterans. I don't like to see that. Nobody wants to see that. We'll see. Some MAGA people are just going to love it no matter what. There's nothing you can do to convince them that he's a disgusting person. Anyway, McCarthy has vented his frustration over being held captive, and he lost some rules votes and lost on bringing the defense appropriations bill through. This is a whole new concept of individuals that just want to burn the whole place down. That doesn't work, McCarthy complained last week. Senators in both parties think McCarthy will have incentive to bring the Senate-passed stopgap funding measure, which hasn't been passed yet, to the floor later in the week. But if senators don't get to finish it until Friday, well, it's going to be way later in the week, like at the end of the week. They believe that if he saves the country from going through an unpopular government shutdown, he'll have enough political capital to beat back any move by conservative critics such as Matt Gaetz to push through a motion to kick him out of the top leadership role. That's a possible dynamic too. I saved the country from government shutdown, which for 2 or 3 days nobody really cares a great deal about. It's a bad thing. You shouldn't do it, but very frequently people, one of the things that ends up happening is the government shuts down over the weekend, for instance, or for, one extra day on either side of the weekend, and with plans to reopen shortly after the Congress can reconvene, and they view that as no harm, no foul, even though the government has to operate over the weekends. But that's the plan. Open it back up very quickly or prevent it from happening, and people will be so grateful that they won't credit Matt Gaetz in any way. But also Matt Gaetz is a super jerk, and it's very difficult for very many people to get it together to credit him with anything. So that's a possibility. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell urged GOP colleagues to support the stopgap funding measure, warning a shutdown would be, quote, bad news for the country and his party. He's right about that. Over the years, I've been pretty clear in my view that government shutdowns are bad news, whichever way you look at them, he said. And they hardly ever produce meaningful policy outcomes at the end of the day. A government shutdown would be an unnecessary disruption to the important work of the Senate's agenda, so I would urge each of my colleagues to work this week to avoid one, he warned. McCarthy floated the idea on Tuesday of meeting with President Biden and negotiating a deal to add to a government funding bill, the new authority and funding to secure the U.S.-Mexico border, something that could be used to entice House Republican support. I think it would be very important to have a meeting with the president. He said the president could keep government open by doing something on the border. Of course, your Congress, you could do something on the border. Do it. One House Democrat said Tuesday that the Senate vote would put pressure on McCarthy to bring a consensus stopgap funding measure to the House floor. In fact, they'll hand him one to bring. I thought McConnell made a helpful statement today saying he supports it. You basically now have, as I said, the Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats, House Democrats, and President Biden on one side, and then the House Republicans on the other. And that we should just pass, whether it's 30 days or 45 days, just pass a continuing resolution and fund things, said Representative Ro Khanna. Does he put it on emphasis there, or Khanna or Khanna? I don't know. One day I'll remember that I don't know that. Again in the future for you. Another potential hurdle in the Senate is Rand Paul, who has threatened to delay the measure over Ukraine funding. Can he delay it anymore? I mean, I guess I'm thinking that Tuesday was a cloture vote, and I guess he could invoke his right to the 30 hours, or he could step out of the way and let them get it done soon. But let's see. If they passed it on Tuesday, if they voted for cloture on Tuesday, it would eat up all of Wednesday into early Thursday, I guess, but he could waive that or, yield back the 30 hours and let them start earlier, maybe. I don't know. Paul put congressional leaders, quote, on notice last week that he, quote, will not consent to expedited passage of any spending measure that provides any more U.S. aid to Ukraine. I guess this one does, so they'll fight about it. I guess they could, if people want to try to amend the bill, he could filibuster on all of the amendments too, so they'll probably be encouraged to keep them to a minimum. Senators and aides say the Kentucky senator could drag out the floor debate and votes until as late as Sunday, which would put the federal government in technical shutdown, though most federal government offices usually are closed on Sunday anyway. So a little bit of discussion of the weekend factor in that one. So I guess I'm reading from this one, that there probably will be amendments offered, and he will filibuster as many of them as he can. And it offers him the opportunity, even in the face of cloture votes passing overwhelmingly, of running out of time on Sunday. But because shutdown happens at 11:59 Saturday, he could force it all the way to there, and the House won't even see the thing until Monday. And so even if the Senate passes the measure on Sunday, they'll remain in shutdown. And the House will have to come back and do this thing on Monday. And if it all works out, they'll be back open Monday night. But who knows? Maybe not. Okay, well, there you have it. So that's where we stand on that front. Let's see. I see Gil is chiming in here saying, maybe we've already covered this. Let's find out. But I thought the Alabama thing was the last chance before a court-mandated map was automatically instituted. I am not sure. We haven't covered it today, but yesterday Joan did mention that there was the breaking news that the Supreme Court wasn't going to issue them any sort of emergency rulings and not deal with it on the shadow docket. But we probably should check in and see what it means because, as we were discussing it yesterday, there's the one thing. On the one hand, the court saying, yes, you need to do this thing. And then on the other hand, Alabama saying, what if I don't? And I'm still not sure how that comes out. We may reserve that for later in the week so that I can collect a little bit more information about it and see where we stand procedurally and what sort of inclinations there are in the court to impose a solution or draw maps themselves and say you have to use them. And I guess there's always the question of the likelihood of any of that happening in time for the 24 election cycle. and that the courts tend to be a little more cautious about these things, even though the end result is they end up allowing defiance of their own rulings and say, we'll get to it next time, and then finding themselves embroiled in litigation again when the next time rolls around. It's kind of a common theme. All right. Well, let's see. Bumping up against our next break, and I do want to get around to the ruling in the New York cases, even though everybody knows the news, but maybe we can break down exactly what's going on here and what's likely to result from it, and we can poke around a little bit for some Alabama news that'll give us some indication of just how likely it is that the 2024 elections in Alabama will continue along racist, gerrymandered lines, and just how likely it is that someone might step in and force Alabama to do the right thing, if there's any way of even doing that. We'll see what we can find next. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think I need to double back on this because there's some, very important information not being conveyed by good old Alexander Bolton, now that I think about it, and now that I look at his reporting from yesterday, about what was going on. Senate votes to advance short-term funding bill to avoid government shutdown. His reporting yesterday, I was like, well, okay, did they pass the cloture resolution? Yes, but you wouldn't know it unless, well, you listened to the show or followed Senate procedure closely enough to read between the lines. Yesterday's lines were the Senate voted Tuesday to advance a short-term funding measure to avoid a government shutdown at the end of the week. The Senate voted 77-19 to advance the legislative vehicle it will use for a continuing resolution, he uses the term, CR, funding the government until November 17th. There's more. That was the buppa-da-ba-da, in case you were wondering. Why am I singing buppa-da-ba-da? Anyway, skimming through the whole thing and then marrying it to his coverage from today's article saying, well, Rand Paul could stretch it out past this time and into Sunday, et cetera, even though the Senate had voted to advance it, right? What does this mean? You and I know what it means, and we just kind of glossed over it, but it's probably worth stopping and pointing out, hey, why are you avoiding, it seems to me, saying outright that the government could shut down because a Republican senator, and we don't know how many of, well, we do know how many of them were agreeing with it, 17 or 19. One Senate Republican, Rand Paul, and 18 colleagues are filibustering the effort to avoid a government shutdown. Why does the word filibuster never appear in here? Why doesn't even the word cloture appear in here? And saying that they had to invoke cloture in order to get past what? A filibuster. That's what clotures get past. Is it a successful filibuster? Filibuster? No, it's not. Was it a filibuster? Well, okay, scholars sometimes argue about that. Is a filibuster really a filibuster if you win cloture overwhelmingly? Yes, it is, because time was wasted. They keep saying the most valuable commodity in the Senate is its time, and very frequently you see, well, like for instance, when we told you about Tommy Tuberville's unilateral across-the-board blockade on Senate consideration of military promotions, right? And putting people into new offices like heads of services and chiefs of staff, etc., and then the joint chiefs, etc. All of these things being blockaded by him because he's filibustering them. Is it a successful filibuster? Well, I'll tell you what. This is where I really disagree with a lot of congressional scholars. So they say things like, well, there was no filibuster of this measure because although a senator objected to unanimous consent and he didn't take the floor and speak at length to try to burn up time necessarily. He just said he was going to object, but he was overwhelmingly outnumbered and the Senate moved a cloture resolution and adopted it, and it was adopted by, let's say, a vote of 77-19. So therefore, there was no filibuster. But there was a filibuster because time was burned. And this is why I brought back Tommy Tuberville. I thought you couldn't filibuster executive appointments anymore because they changed not the rules but the interpretation of the rules such that cloture was could be invoked by a bare majority vote, simple majority vote. You don't need 60 anymore in order to do it, like you still do with legislation. Well, true, but that doesn't mean the vote doesn't have to be taken. And the reason, they didn't change the rules, and so cloture still needs to be invoked. They simply changed the interpretation of the number by which they would determine whether or not cloture was invoked, and all the rest of the rules still apply. You have to file for cloture, but you can't file for cloture sooner than a certain point after the bill has been taken up for, or moved for consideration. You still have to burn 30 hours post-cloture or, at least allow for it. Lots of time being burnt. And the reason they used to say, or why they were saying that the Tuberville blockade was an issue was because even if you could gain, successfully secure cloture on the nominations with a simple majority vote, it still meant burning all that time every time you wanted to move one of the 200 pending nominations forward, and that if he really wanted to be a stick in the mud and ruin everything, he could force the Senate to spend up to, I think somebody calculated out, well, I don't remember what it was, weeks, months, to get through all of those pending nominations, even though the vote on every cloture motion would be a foregone conclusion, but each one of them comes with 30 hours of post-cloture time that a real jerk-ass could force to be burned. And they will tell you, well, the most valuable thing about the Senate, the most valuable commodity in the Senate is Senate floor time. Well, if that's the case, why would you leave it out of your reporting on the race against the deadline for a government shutdown? It's the most valuable thing there is in the Senate. Well, then include it in your coverage. But for some reason, lots of people will have lots of conclusions about what that reason is. We like to credit, I've been crediting Alexander Bolton with being a relatively thorough reporter here, but here, a giant mistake. Why not state the fact that Republicans, or at least a Republican, 19 in total, have been voting to continue to filibuster the effort to avoid a shutdown? We all know that this thing is going to be blamed on Republicans anyway, so it's not like they're really successfully hiding from something. Or maybe they are. I don't know. And Alexander Bolton, I guess, is helping in a way that he shouldn't by refusing to even use any of the filibuster adjacent language, like recognizing the fact that on Tuesday, what they were voting on to advance that short-term funding measure was a cloture motion. And cloture motions come as an effort to end filibusters. And everybody hates the filibuster, and everybody would love to know that Rand Paul and 18 others voted to continue to filibuster this thing. Just say it. They didn't. I did. So there you go. Now you know what's going on with respect to that. So there was that. And then there was the news that the House GOP advances, and they don't have a filibuster, 4 spending bills after failed attempts. So things have turned around. Michael Schnell is the reporter on this one, also for The Hill. But I need to update myself on what's moving in the House and what's not. House Republicans on Tuesday advanced 4 full-year spending bills. We had only seen 1 completed of the 12 they need to do, handing Speaker McCarthy a small win, but doing little to stave off the government shutdown at the end of the month. The chamber voted 216 to 212 to begin consideration of spending measures to fund the Department of Defense, which they had previously not been able to do, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of State and Foreign Operations, but also, and the fourth one ready, Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, and the Food and Drug Administration. Those 4 appropriations bills at some point moving forward. Marjorie Taylor Greene, better known as Murdery Trader Greene, the lone GOP no vote. How do you like that? Her opposition did not come as a surprise, all by herself. Ahead of the vote, she said she was a hard no on the rule because 2 of the spending bills include funding for Ukraine. It didn't make any difference, so I'm not certain I don't know how much I would read into it. It's just she said she was going to be a no, and so she now gets to say, when I say I'm going to be a no, I'm really going to be a no, even though being a no doesn't make any difference in the world. So it was the safest no possible. So it's just to play for the folks back home. Or, please give me money, Russia. I don't know. McCarthy initially said he would remove the Ukraine aid from the Pentagon funding bill and hold a separate vote on it, but he backtracked, I guess probably after finding out, there's another rationale, but he backtracked after finding out that the only idiot that was stupid enough to stand alone on this thing was Murdery Trader Greene, and he said, just as well. To hell with her. I mean, to the extent that we can paint her as a Russian stooge, awesome. And then he went ahead with it. But the official reason that he backtracked, it says here, was after recognizing that there was also assistance for Ukraine, Kyiv, in the appropriations bill for the Department of State and Foreign Operations. The speaker said it was too difficult to strip the money out of the State Department measure. Green spoke out against the aid for Ukraine following the vote. Yargle bargle, was what she essentially said. The successful procedural vote marks an incremental win for McCarthy, who has struggled to advance spending measures this month amid conservative opposition. You know all about it. So, all right. 4 of the 11 remaining bills move forward. That's important because, one of the other articles from The Hill sitting in my inbox is one that says, one that is about what will shut down and what won't if they don't make the deadline. And the answer, as always, is the departments that have seen their appropriations bills successfully passed in both houses and signed into law won't shut down. And, so they can make it a partial government shut. It already will be a partial government shutdown, technically speaking, because one appropriations bill has passed. So whatever departments that were in the bill, they won't shut down. And if they can manage, I guess if they manage to pass any or all of these 4 bills, that doesn't seem really likely that they'd get to all 4. Nor does it seem particularly likely that the Senate would receive them in time to fully consider them. And the Senate will have no incentive to do so, given that they're going to have dispatched a CR to them. And that's another way to jam the House too, right? By the way, if the House had sent all 11 appropriations bills to the Senate at this point, or did so between now and 11:59 Saturday, it would be a crapshoot whether the Senate would pass any or all of them. On the one hand, you might think, oh, that's a way for the House to jam the Senate, right? If they don't pass these bills, then the Senate will be blamed for the shutdown. But the Senate is really adept at saying, well, our procedure is different. Things take longer. People will want to reserve the right to amend the bill, and they'll filibuster the bill if they don't get the right to amend things. So we need to grant them the opportunity to amend the bills just to avoid the filibuster. So we're going to do that. And therefore, we're going to be amending the bills and sending it back to the House. And for some reason, the press always eats it up and reports it this way. Well, that's just the nature of the Senate. Sorry. And they end up jamming the House straight back because there's nothing we can do about the filibuster. It exists and it gives senators the tools to do this. And no, we won't and can't pass these things by unanimous consent or with a rapid succession of votes. We're going to take our time with it and probably amend it and ended up sending it back to the House. But every time the Senate passes something and sends it over to the House, they say the House can't amend it because if you amend it, it'll end up being filibustered here in the Senate again. And for some reason, that's just traditionally the way it works out, and the House keeps getting jammed on these things. Anyway, so yes, the answer to what will and won't shut down is answered by which appropriations bills actually managed to get through before the shutdown deadline. Let's see. By the way, new breaking news. Another senator, Democratic senator, joining the ranks. He started the morning on the list of people who had not yet called for Menendez to resign. But Dick Durbin, the number 2 ranking Senate Democrat, now chimes in and says, yeah, that should happen. So, okay, a bit of breaking news there. Now over to Pocket so we can get to some of the other subjects. Maybe the thing, well, I really do need to read the background reporting on exactly what's going on in the motion practice here. Let's see. I think Greg already cited the Times reporting on it, and it's probably one of the better sources of it. But let's go to the Associated Press just so we get a different perspective and can add a different article to our roundup here. Judge rules Donald Trump defrauded banks and insurers while building real estate empire. Yes, great. Good information. Is this a verdict in the trial? Is the trial over? No, it's not. It's still scheduled to begin next week. That may confuse some of you. Let's see if we can help unravel that. Michael Sisak from the AP will help us do that. A judge ruled Tuesday that Donald Trump committed fraud for years. Yeah, of course. While building the real estate empire that catapulted him to fame and the White House, and he ordered some of the former president's companies removed from his control and dissolved. That is a very bold and forward ruling. What does it have to do with getting ready for the trial? Let's find out. Judge Arthur Engoron, if we're pronouncing that correctly, ruling in a civil lawsuit brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, found that Trump and his company deceived banks, insurers, and others by massively overvaluing his assets and exaggerating his net worth on paperwork. Trump and paperwork, man. I always say that. On paperwork used in making deals and securing loans. Never trust Trump and on his paperwork ever. Engoron ordered that some of Trump's business licenses be rescinded as punishment. That is really remarkable and forward-thinking, making it difficult or impossible for them to do business in New York. Not that they were doing any business anyway. And he said he would continue to have an independent monitor oversee Trump Organization operations. And when I say they weren't doing business, that doesn't mean they weren't moving money around. It meant that they were essentially really should have been regarded as frauds and criminal enterprises from the beginning, and now we get around to finally doing that. If not successfully appealed, the order would strip Trump of his authority to make strategic and financial decisions over some of his key properties in the state. Trump, in a series of statements, railed against the decision, calling it, quote, un-American, and part of an ongoing plot to damage his campaign to return to the White House. It's just, calling fraud. You can't run. Normally, you would think for a president as an adjudicated fraud, but he can, and he will. Let's see. So he's crying, my civil rights have been violated. I'm not even going to bother with his voice on this one. And some appellate court, whether federal or state, must reverse this horrible un-American decision. I have to, every time I see him say horrible, I have to do his voice. Horrible un-American decision. I like that. Some court has to do it. Turn those machines back on is basically the attitude he's striking here. Let's see. He insisted his company had done a magnificent job for New York State, really hasn't done anything for them, and done business perfectly, another perfect phone call. Everything's perfect for him. Calling it a very sad day for the New York State system of justice, ! Trump's lawyer, Christopher Kise, said they would appeal. Of course, they always do, calling the decision completely disconnected from the facts and governing law, except it's not. Engoron's ruling days before the start of a non-jury trial in James's lawsuit. That's interesting, too. So they were never going to impanel a jury at all, which makes it all the more easy to issue what did we say that they were doing? Summary judgment. Yes. I don't know. For some reason, I was sticking in my head was the cousin of the summary judgment, the directed verdict. But that only happens when there is a jury seated. And it's interesting, though. Yeah, you don't have to have, I guess everybody has to waive the jury trial in order for it to get to this point. But they're doing a non-trial jury in this lawsuit. So that's interesting. That means that it's purely a matter of law. The facts are stipulated in this case, I suppose. And so that all the more reason to think this looks very bad for Trump. That, like I said, to get to summary judgment, the judge has to assume that the facts are as the defense, if it's the prosecution that's moving for summary judgment. But whoever it is that moves for summary judgment, you then assume the facts in favor of the other party. And if you still find there's just legally no way for them to win, boom, you get your summary judgment. So Engoron's ruling days before the start of the trial in James's lawsuit is the strongest repudiation yet of Trump's carefully coiffed image as a wealthy and shrewd real estate mogul turned political powerhouse. NBC is to blame for that one in their production of The Apprentice. Beyond mere bragging about his riches, Trump, his company, and key executives repeatedly lied about them on his annual financial statements, reaping rewards such as favorable loan terms and lower insurance costs, Engoron found. And this is the sort of thing I was hoping that a judge, this is a very sweeping finding, but you can see what the logic is. If we find that they were repeatedly lying about the value of their properties so that they could get better terms for loans and better insurance costs. Essentially what you're finding is this whole real estate empire was only made possible because they were repeatedly lying in order to reap these benefits. And if otherwise such a real estate empire could not have been assembled, well then the obvious remedy here is to say disassemble it. But that is pretty aggressive for anybody to actually pass down as a final judgment, pre-trial anyway. But, the facts kind of demand it here. Where were we here? These tactics crossed the line and violated the law, the judge said, rejecting Trump's contention that a disclaimer on the financial statements absolved him of any wrongdoing. Right. They just slapped some boilerplate stuff on there and said, well, it hasn't been proven in a court of law that all this stuff is true, but I am telling you it is. But you're kind of doing that under penalty of perjury. They can bring you to court and sue you for it if you've misrepresented anything, which is what's happening now. In defendants' world, rent-regulated apartments are worth the same as unregulated apartments. You heard this from Greg, right? Restricted land is worth the same as unrestricted land. Restrictions can evaporate into thin air. A disclaimer by one party casting responsibility on another party exonerates the other party's lies, Engoron wrote in his 35-page ruling. That is a fantasy world, not the real world. The disclaimers being, we're, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're not responsible for any of this. But if you accept it from us, then it's your fault, even though we're lying. Well, you can put that on there. And this is, again, sort of childlike lawyering, right? We put a disclaimer on there that says, if you believe this, it's your fault. Well, it's there, and you make that claim, but it's an inequitable claim, and it's unlikely that any court upon examination is really going to say, well, it's your fault for believing lies, instead of it being the liar's fault for lying. Well, you you put that in there and it looks like legalese, and some people are apt to believe that they have no recourse against you, but it's not the case that a court, if asked, will actually enforce that. And here they have not. They have said, no, the liars are liable for their lies, and you're not liable for believing them. Manhattan prosecutors had looked into bringing criminal charges over the same conduct, but declined to do so, leaving James to sue Trump and seek penalties that aim to disrupt his and his family's ability to do business. Take the money, right? Engoron's ruling, in a phase of the case known as summary judgment, resolves the key claims in James's lawsuit, but several others remain. He'll decide on those claims and James's request for $250 million in penalties at the trial starting on October 2nd. Trump's lawyers have asked for an appeals court to intervene with a delay. If we go to trial under these circumstances, where the judge has already ruled that we were lying about these things, then we'll lose. It will materially affect the outcome of the case. And we contend that the judge has ruled this way in error, and we want a review of the judge's ruling by a higher court before we start the trial. It makes a certain amount of logical sense if there were any real basis to believe that an appeals court would find that Engoron had made a mistake in reaching the decision he did about summary judgment, partial summary judgment in this case. But it may be the case that the New York courts say, you're just not going to win on that. And a cursory glance at the 35-page opinion, which we can read inside of an hour, tells us that that's the case, and they may just reject the appeal and say, you're just going to have to go to trial. Sorry. You can appeal the outcome of the trial, too. You'll get another shot at it, but we're not going to stop the trial from going forward. Today, a judge ruled in our favor and found that Donald Trump and the Trump Organization engaged in years of financial fraud, James said in a statement. We look forward to presenting the rest of our case at trial. Trump's lawyers, in their own summary judgment bid, they moved for summary judgment too, and I guess didn't get it. But remember the mechanics of this. At some point, the Trump lawyers said, go ahead and assume everything that the New York State Attorney General claims about the case here is true. And you will see that there's no way you can legally come down on their side. And in fact, the judge had to go through that exercise and said, I actually believe that they've got it right in almost all instances. So that was an interesting bid on their part. Trump's lawyers in their own summary judgment bid had asked the judge to throw out the whole case, arguing that there wasn't any evidence that the public was harmed by Trump's actions. They don't understand, macroeconomics, I guess. So, all right. They also argued that many of the allegations in the lawsuit were barred by the statute of limitations. It's too late for you to sue us about these things, even though they're still ongoing. Engoron, noting that he had rejected those arguments earlier in the case, equated them to the plot of the film Groundhog Day. Yeah. He fined 5 defense lawyers $7,500 each as punishment for engaging in repetitive, frivolous arguments, but denied James's request to sanction Trump and other defendants. He'll get to that later on, I'm sure. But he'll sanction them for the fraud, not for the frivolous lawsuits. As we've mentioned this 100 times, Groundhog Day is a good metaphor here, or analogy, I guess I should say. They just keep saying, well, we appeal anyway. Well, no. Okay, you lose. Okay, but I appeal the losing. No, there's no appeal of that. Well, then I appeal you're not agreeing that there should be an appeal of my losing. Over and over again. No, you're going to be fined. James, a Democrat, sued Trump and the Trump Organization a year ago, accusing them of routinely inflating the value of assets like skyscrapers, golf courses, and his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, padding his bottom line by billions, in fact. A well-known game. By the way, Engoron found that Trump consistently overvalued Mar-a-Lago, as we heard the raw numbers before, but apparently that amounts to overvaluing it by 2,300%. That's pretty incredible. Trump also rebuked here for lying about the size of his Manhattan apartment. Trump claimed his 3-story Trump Tower penthouse was nearly 3 times its actual size, valuing it at $327 million. Nope. A discrepancy of this order of magnitude by a real estate developer sizing up his own living space of decades can only be considered fraud. There you go. That's pretty good. Then Eric Trump complaining about things. But by the way, Eric Trump was complaining about it on Twitter, not Truth Social. I think that's kind of weird too. Maybe he also did it there. But I find that interesting for its own reasons. All right. So the upshot, under the ruling, limited liability companies that control some of Trump's key properties, such as 40 Wall Street, will be dissolved and authority over how to run them handed over to a receiver. Trump would lose his authority over whom to hire or fire, always a good idea, whom to rent office space to, and other key decisions. The decision seeks to nationalize one of the most successful corporate empires in the United States, is the line that his lawyer decided to go with. And then a recounting of the many ways in which Trump sucks and has been in trouble before. So you know all of that. That gives us some idea of where we stand procedurally in that case and sets us up well for the rest of the week. There was some interesting stuff here too, although it's time to play our outro music, but maybe I can grab this before we're gone for the day. Is this the one? Yeah, I think it was a Blue Sky thread from Mike Dunford, who compiled this non-exclusive list of phrases that you do not ever want to see in a court directing them at you. And they are things like, yes, defendants' arguments invoke the time loop in the film Groundhog Day. Defendants' contention is pure sophistry. As this court and others have made abundantly clear, it is not disputed that, or ellipsis as we would rather say, defendants repeat the erroneous argument that. Indeed, the court made this crystal clear. Defendants' rehashed argument that. Defendants glaringly misrepresent. The word something something does not appear anywhere in the reference decision, and the defendant's characterization of its holding is inaccurate. Defendants yet again argue that. All of these things. This goes on, and we're not going to finish it in time, but it goes up to number 19. By the way, someone comments, 12 is bad. What's 12? Had defendants not cut off the beginning of the sentence they cited, it would be evident that... Yes. What an incredible thing, and I love the legal terminology I'm using here, ... All right, time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam.
From networksradio.com.
Of course, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.
To Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, I'm sure he'll be talking about Trump and the outcome of this case too, but on the rest of the menu, it's a feature, not a bug, that threats and harassment are causing America's West to bleed qualified elections officials. Yes, that's happening everywhere. And the newest news from California, raising taxes on guns and ammo. Check it out next.